on organizing and waging armed struggle against Japanese imperialism. Speech delivered at the meeting of Party and Young Communist League Cadres held in Mingyuegou, Yanji County. December 16th, 1931. Comrades, the present situation demands that we immediately organize and wage armed struggle against Japanese imperialism. At a time when they are launching aggression against the continent, the Japanese imperialists are intensifying their all-round reactionary offensive against the Korean people for the security of the rear. These scoundrels are now suppressing the Korean people's revolutionary advance by force of arms. They are wantonly arresting, imprisoning, and murdering our innocent people in every part of the country. This greatly aggravates the national and class contradictions between Japanese imperialism and the Korean people. The anti-Japanese struggle of workers, peasants, and the broad masses in general to resist the Japanese imperialists' barbarous suppression is growing stronger and is gradually turning into violent conflict. The general strike by dockers at Wonsan, the strikes by workers at the Sinhung coal mine and the Pyongyang rubber factory, the peasant uprising in Tanchon, and the peasant struggle on the Fuji farm of Ryongchan all show that the workers and peasants in our country have begun violent opposition to Japanese imperialism, which is armed to the teeth. A youth and student resistance is also rapidly growing, inspired by the Gwangju student incident. In keeping with the violent resistance of the people in the homeland, the Korean peasant struggle is rapidly gaining momentum in eastern Manchuria too. Under the leadership of the Korean communists, a large-scale, well-organized autumn struggle took place involving more than 100,000 peasants there. This developed into a violent struggle and struck a great blow against Japanese imperialism and the reactionary landlords, and a brilliant victory was won. It has become obvious to the Korean working class, peasants, youth and students and other patriotic-minded people that they cannot escape ruination as a people, nor even subsist without resorting to revolutionary violence. Under these conditions, it is vital for the anti-Japanese national liberation struggle to channel the surging violence of the masses into armed struggle. Organizing and launching armed struggle is the only correct method for liberating the country and liberating the people from Japanese imperialist colonial enslavement. The Japanese imperialists, those burglars, have occupied our country by force of arms and deployed counter-revolutionary forces to maintain their colonial rule in Korea. In order to suppress every patriotic struggle of the Korean people through violence, they have permanently stationed more than 2 armed divisions in our country and have established over 2,000 police stations and military police institutions and dozens of prisons. They have passed all kinds of evil fascist laws to deprive the Korean people of freedom of speech, the press, assembly, association, and demonstration, and to prohibit all political activities. The Japanese imperialist aggressors are using all possible means and methods to reduce the Korean people to permanent colonial slavery. They will not retreat one step until their aggressive forces are crushed. It is a naive illusion to expect the Japanese imperialist scoundrels to leave our country meekly. The experience of the past 20-odd years of the anti-Japanese national liberation movement confirms this. From around the time when the Japanese imperialists occupied Korea to this day, our people have never ceased their anti-Japanese struggle in one form or another. But each time, Japanese imperialism mobilized its armed forces and barbarously suppressed these protests. Patriots have grieved over the ruin of the country and fervently appealed for independence, but in vain. Bigoted nationalists have foolishly tried to attain independence by submitting petition, disregarding the people's will, and Japanese imperialism has answered this with bloody suppression. Armed uprisings by the righteous volunteers and the Independence Army have also taken place. But these struggles were foiled, one after the other, by the counter-revolutionary forces of Japanese imperialism, because they, too, failed to be guided by Marxist-Leninist strategy and tactics, and were sporadic. Experience clearly shows that our nationwide desire for the liberation of the country can never be achieved without crushing the aggressive forces of Japanese imperialism. In order to smash these forces and liberate the country, it is imperative that we launch an organized armed struggle based on Marxist-Leninist strategy and tactics. It is self-evident that we cannot depend upon nor beg anyone for our country's liberation. We must achieve the liberation of our country and nation by our own efforts through armed struggle. Comrades, the present tense revolutionary situation, brought about by the Japanese imperialist occupation of Manchuria, urgently demands that we take up arms. Now is the best time to launch an anti-Japanese war on a mass scale by waging armed struggle. First, because the whole of Manchuria is in a state of anarchy, as Kuomintang rule has disintegrated, and the Japanese imperialist ruling machinery is not yet established. Second, because the Chinese people have risen up en masse in their anti-Japanese struggle, thus opening up a great era of stormy revolution. Broad sections of the Chinese people are launching an anti-Japanese Save the Nation movement throughout their country against the imperialist occupation of Manchuria. Among the armed units so engaged, the progressive sector, led by the Communist Party of China, is small as yet. But we can turn it into a more vigorous struggle when we fight in unity with all the anti-Japanese armed units. The time has come when all should come out, weapon in hand, and dedicate themselves to struggle to liberate their country. Let us fully mobilize all the patriotic forces opposed to Japanese imperialism, irrespective of wealth, partisanship, and religion, whether nobles or commoners. We must guarantee that the whole nation participate to the full in the anti-Japanese armed conflict. Those who possess weapons offering weapons, those who have money donating money, and those who have strength dedicating strength. We must support the national liberation struggle of the Chinese people against Japanese imperialism, our common enemy, and form a united front with them. In this way, we shall enjoy mass support not only from the Korean people, but also from broad sections of the Chinese people in Manchuria. Thus, we shall successfully develop the anti-Japanese armed struggle, enjoying, as we shall be, the active support and encouragement of the two peoples. From now on, we must begin to organize armed units and expand and strengthen our own armed forces by arming ourselves with weapons seized from the enemy. If we use to our advantage the natural and geographical conditions of the Korean border and the wide expanses of Manchuria, we can be victorious by weakening and smashing the enemy forces one by one, even with small forces. This means that we must organize and wage armed struggle with guerrilla warfare as our major tactic. Guerrilla warfare is a method of armed struggle which will enable us to deal heavy political and military blows at the enemy while preserving our own forces, and to defeat the numerically and technically superior enemy even with small forces. Only when we organize and launch armed struggle using guerrilla warfare, while relying on the active support and encouragement of the masses and on the favorable conditions of nature and terrain, will we be fully capable of defeating the piratical Japanese imperialist aggressive forces? 1. On organizing an anti-Japanese people's guerrilla army. Comrades, if we want to organize and wage armed struggle, we must create our own revolutionary armed forces with sufficient strength to smash the enemy's counter-revolutionary armed forces. In order to be victorious over the Japanese imperialist robbers, it is essential that our revolutionary armed forces shall be fully capable of preserving and expanding our own strength, and of continuously weakening and destroying the enemy's forces in a long, drawn-out struggle. We must organize such a revolutionary armed force as an anti-Japanese people's guerrilla army. This army must be fundamentally different from the nationalist armed forces, the righteous volunteers, and the independence army, which strove for Korea's independence. It must become a genuine people's army, made up of the fine sons and daughters of workers and peasants. It must become a genuine revolutionary army, equipped with Marxist-Leninist ideas, and fighting for the country's liberation, the people's freedom and happiness. Our guerrilla army must become a political army which not only fights for the people's interests, but educates, organizes, and mobilizes them in revolutionary struggle. And it must become a working-class army, which is true not only to the Korean Revolution, but to the world revolution. We are not starting from scratch in organizing a revolutionary armed force now. In the past, we nurtured communists of a new generation in the Young Communist League of Korea and the Anti-Imperialist Youth League. Thus, we have established the core around which we can organize a revolutionary armed force. Furthermore, last year we gained some experience and learned some lessons by organizing the Korean Revolutionary Army and by carrying out political and military activities. On the basis of these successes and experiences, we must first push ahead with organizing the anti-Japanese people's guerrilla army with the fine young communists seasoned and tested in the crucible of the hard-fought underground revolutionary struggle as the core. By closely combining the organization of the guerrilla army with the masses' revolutionary advance, we shall admit progressive workers and peasants, as well as patriotic youth, trained and tested in actual revolutionary struggle, and strive to expand the ranks continuously. In order to guarantee that the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army properly discharges its mission as a genuine people's army, a revolutionary army, we should work to consolidate its ranks politically and militarily, while fully ensuring communist leadership. Obtaining arms is another important task to be carried out at the same time as founding the guerrilla army. Men and weapons are the two elements of the armed forces. Being well armed is one of the basic factors for the success of armed struggle. How then should we equip our guerrilla army? We have no source of weapons, nor anyone to give them to us. Therefore, we have no alternative but to get them by our own efforts. The only way is to capture them from the enemy. True, this is a dangerous and difficult task. But if we attack the enemy bravely and in a self-sacrificing spirit with a high degree of revolutionary determination, and if, at the same time, we surprise them, skillfully making them vulnerable or making the most of their weaknesses, then it will be entirely possible for us to seize their weapons and arm ourselves. Weapons are our life and soul. Oppose armed force with armed force. This must be our fighting slogan at present. With this slogan, we have to display the revolutionary spirit of self-reliance. Thus, we shall take weapons from the Japanese imperialist aggressive army, from the Chinese Northeast Army, which surrendered to Japanese imperialism, from the Japanese and Chinese Northeast Police, and from the evil, reactionary landlords and bureaucrats, and so obtain arms for the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army, which we shall soon organize. While seizing enemy weapons and arming ourselves, we must not neglect to make spears, swords, clubs, and the like. For without these primitive weapons, it will be impossible to capture enemy weapons. We have to begin by organizing small guerrilla units in different areas and arming them, and then gradually expand them to become large units of the Revolutionary Armed Force. When we organize the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army, taking in the fine sons and daughters of workers and peasants, with us, young communists, as the core, and when we strike repeated political and military blows at Japanese imperialism, by waging swift and flexible guerrilla warfare everywhere, the scoundrels will be rendered powerless and will surely be driven out of Korea and Manchuria. 2. On establishing guerrilla base. In order to organize and wage armed struggle through guerrilla warfare, a guerrilla base must be set up. A solid guerrilla base will make it possible to expand the armed ranks continually and wage protracted guerrilla warfare, even when besieged by the formidable enemy. It will also make it possible for us to protect the revolutionary masses from the barbarity of the enemy. In particular, as we have to carry on armed struggle with no state backing and no aid from outside, we badly need our own firm military base, a rear base. Furthermore, this base is absolutely necessary in order to go ahead with preparations for the founding of the Communist Party and for the revolutionary movement as a whole, while waging armed struggle. A guerrilla base can take different forms according to the prevailing subjective and objective situation, that is, the environment, the conditions under which we carry on the struggle, and the degree of preparedness of the armed force. Our present situation demands the establishment of guerrilla zones bases in the form of liberated areas. Only when guerrilla zones, completely out of reach of the enemy, are set up will it be possible to protect the young revolutionary armed force and the revolutionary masses and make successful military and political preparations for carrying on the anti-Japanese national liberation struggle as a whole, while concentrating on armed struggle. To establish guerrilla zones, we should, in the initial stage, work to revolutionize the broad rural areas. The revolutionized rural areas will, on the one hand, serve as provisional centers from which the guerrilla army can conduct operations until the guerrilla zones are established, and, on the other hand, they will provide a firm basis for establishing the zones. Moreover, in the course of revolutionizing the countryside, valuable experience will be gained for setting up such zones. From now on, therefore, we must make every effort to revolutionize the rural areas so that the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army, the moment it is organized, will be able to rely on these areas to wage guerrilla warfare and constantly expand its military and political strength. We will have to set up secure guerrilla bases or liberated areas in favorable zones of the revolutionized rural areas as conditions shape up over time. The establishment of a guerrilla base or liberated area must presuppose the following three basic conditions. First, there must be an economic base and a mass foundation to ensure protection and support from the revolutionary masses. Second, it must be geographically advantageous for the guerrilla army to defend itself even with a small force, and difficult for the enemy to attack even with up-to-date weapons. Third, it must have an armed force of its own, which should at least be capable of self-defense. The mountainous area along the Tumen River, the northern border area of our country, satisfies these conditions fairly well. This is an area where more than 80% of the population are poverty-stricken peasants who immigrated from Korea, unable to endure the oppression and exploitation of Japanese imperialism, and where socialist ideas spread early on. So the national and class awareness of the masses is comparatively high. In particular, it is here that revolutionary organizations rapidly expanded and gained a great many followers after the Mingyuegou meeting of last spring, and that the mass movement grew swiftly in the course of the recent autumn struggle. Moreover, this area is full of steep mountains and deep valleys and dense forests, and so forms a natural fortress difficult for the enemy to attack even with their modern weapons, but easy for a guerrilla force to defend. Also, as it adjoins the Hamgyong and Rangnim mountains of our country, this area is conveniently placed for our future revolutionary movement to advance into our homeland. For these reasons, we must set up guerrilla zones, guerrilla bases in the form of liberated areas in the mountainous and revolutionized rural areas along the Tumen River. In each guerrilla zone, we must not only train the guerrilla army politically and militarily, we must also expand and reinforce paramilitary organizations, such as the Red Guards and the Children's Vanguard, and arm everyone in defense of the guerrilla base. At the same time, we must actively nurture qualified cadres for the Korean Revolution and unite the broad masses to form a single revolutionary force through the intensified work of all the revolutionary organizations, thus energetically organizing and mobilizing them for victory in the armed struggle. In each zone, we must also establish a revolutionary government, enforce democratic reforms, build a school, a hospital, an armory, a publishing house, etc., and so bring about a new revolutionary order. Only by accomplishing these tasks can the guerrilla zones creditably perform their role as bases for armed struggle, bases for the Korean Revolution. A guerrilla zone can be only consolidated when it is closely connected with the revolutionized rural areas. If it is not, it will not be in contact with the broad masses in the enemy-held area and will consequently be isolated and hemmed in by the enemy. Therefore, we must concentrate on revolutionizing the rural areas even after the establishment of the guerrilla zones. To this end, we must deploy the revolutionary organizations in the rural areas around them and educate the masses in revolution. We must also make sure that our comrades become village heads and sub-county heads, positions at the lowest levels of the enemy's ruling institutions. If the broad masses are revolutionized and our men take these posts, then the areas are under enemy control only in name, but actually, it is, like the guerrilla zones, under the jurisdiction of the revolutionary government. When these revolutionized areas expand, they will clearly favor the establishment, consolidation, and expansion of the guerrilla zones, and also guarantee very advantageous conditions for guerrilla operations. In order to stamp out by arms the Korean people's national liberation struggle, which is daily intensifying over the entire northern border area of our country, the Japanese imperialists are now harshly suppressing the revolutionary organizations, even massacring the Korean people, especially revolutionaries. Therefore, unless we rapidly expand the revolutionized rural areas and successfully establish guerrilla zones, we may run the risk of losing the revolutionary masses. So we have to push ahead energetically to set up guerrilla bases in close combination with the organization of the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army. 3. On laying a mass foundation for armed struggle. In order to organize and wage armed struggle, there must be a solid mass foundation on which the guerrilla army can depend in its operations. Guerrilla warfare is, in essence, people's warfare that presupposes the active participation of the masses, the energetic participation of the people, and their support and encouragement provide the basic condition for guaranteeing the constant reinforcement of the guerrilla army and the success of guerrilla warfare. Only when there are a solid mass foundation and close ties of kinship with the masses can the guerrilla army break through bottlenecks, overcome difficulties, and win final victory, however protracted and arduous the struggle. Therefore, we must firmly unite the broad sections of the people under the banner of the anti-Japanese armed struggle by strengthening organizational and political activity among them. The present situation favors the promotion of the movement for the anti-Japanese National United Front, embracing all sections of our people. With the Japanese imperialist invasion of Manchuria, the anti-Japanese sentiments of the Korean people of all social strata have grown more than ever before, and the anti-Japanese struggle of the masses is rapidly gaining momentum. In the homeland, violent protests by workers, peasants, youth, and students are on the rise, and the anti-Japanese movement of nationalists with a conscience and patriotic men of religion is growing rapidly. In particular, the revolutionary spirit of the Korean peasants in eastern Manchuria is higher than ever before. When we give full play to this mounting revolutionary spirit and the anti-Japanese sentiments of the masses, and organize and mobilize them properly, we can form an anti-Japanese united front on a nationwide scale and lay a solid mass foundation for armed struggle. In the past, we infiltrated workers, peasants, and all other sections of the Korean people in central and eastern Manchuria, formed mass organizations such as the Trade Union, the Peasants Association, and the Anti-Imperialist League, uniting the broad masses around them, and carried out mass political work. In the course of this, the mass foundation for armed struggle was gradually built, and we accumulated rich experience in mass political work. In particular, we brought about a radical change in mass political work in accordance with the correct organizational line laid down at the Mingyuegou meeting of last spring. As a result, we revolutionized many rural districts all over the northern border area of our country and in eastern Manchuria, and, basing ourselves on this success, led the recent autumn struggle to victory. On the basis of these successes and this experience, we must in future go among the broad sections of anti-Japanese. Masses, workers, peasants, youth, and students, intellectuals, petty bourgeoisie, non-comprador capitalists, and men of religion, and strengthen the work of educating, awakening, and uniting them in the revolutionary organizations. In this way, we shall lay a solid mass foundation for the anti-Japanese armed struggle. In order to do this, it is of great importance to get the majority of the people from all walks of life to join the Anti-Imperialist Youth League, the Peasants Association, the Revolutionary Mutual Aid Society, and various other revolutionary organizations, and strengthen their revolutionary education. To do this educational work well, we must first arm ourselves with proletarian revolutionary thoughts and adopt a revolutionary work attitude of relying on the masses. If we fail to do this, we cannot enjoy the trust of the majority of the working people, nor develop the mass movement. First of all, we must go among the masses basic to the revolution, the workers and peasants, and do active information work by speech and pamphlets to suit the given situation and audience. In due course, we must bring the progressive elements among them to class awareness and train them to be revolutionaries. And we must ensure that they revolutionize their families in villages and wider rural areas. While nurturing revolutionary leading core elements in each district and constantly enhancing their leadership role, we must form basic party organizations on an experimental basis, reinforce the YCL organizations, and expand and strengthen numerous mass organizations. In the rural areas, in particular, it is necessary to strengthen the Peasants Association, the Revolutionary Mutual Aid Society, and the Anti-Imperialist League, actively draw the peasant masses into the organizations and give them organizational training. To lay a firm mass foundation for armed struggle, we must also continue to build, train, and expand the revolutionary forces in the course of revolutionary struggle, while constantly encouraging the revolutionary advance of the masses. We must, in the course of this, expand the revolutionary organizations and develop and train the revolutionary forces so as to lay a more solid mass foundation for the anti-Japanese armed struggle. 4. On forming an anti-Japanese united front of the Korean and Chinese peoples. A successful armed struggle against Japanese imperialism also requires the formation of a broad anti-Japanese united front of the Korean and Chinese peoples. The Japanese imperialist occupation of Manchuria has stirred up the Chinese people's indignation. The mass of the Chinese people have launched an anti-Japanese Save the Nation movement, and some units of the Chinese Northeast Army have risen in mutiny under an anti-Japanese banner. It is a matter of urgency to form an anti-Japanese united front of the Korean and Chinese peoples in the struggle against their common enemy, the Japanese imperialists. Only when we accomplish this will it be possible to join to the utmost the efforts of the Korean and Chinese peoples and deal greater political and military blows at the Japanese imperialist aggressors. Today, the most urgent need in organizing the United Front is to ally ourselves with the soldiers of the Chinese Northeast Army who have risen up holding the anti-Japanese Save the Nation banner. Overawed by the Japanese imperialist aggression in Manchuria, the Chinese Northeast warlords wavered, did not resist, and finally retreated into China proper or surrendered to the aggressors. Chief of the Northeast warlords, Zhang Shuiliang, fled to Jinju the moment the Japanese invaded. Then in October, he left Manchuria and crossed the Shanhaiguan over to China proper. Many other warlords in the military areas, under the control of the Chinese Northeast Army, knelt down before the Japanese imperialist aggressors without even firing a gun and became their puppets, so betraying their homeland. But many Chinese soldiers and some officers with a national conscience have mutinied in protest against their warlord's surrender and have gone into the mountains. In eastern Manchuria alone, there is a growing tendency to refuse to surrender among the army units stationed in Heilong and Yanji. Thousands of soldiers, in groups or individually, have already risen up in Wanqing, Antu, and other districts. We, therefore, should form an allied front with the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units that separated from the Chinese Northeast Army after mutinies under the banner of anti-Japanese national salvation. Then, the anti-Japanese armed forces will rapidly grow in scope and strength and deal greater political and military blows at the Japanese imperialist aggressive forces. Although they have rallied under the anti-Japanese banner, some units of the Chinese anti-Japanese National Salvation Army that have mutinied and the peasants' armed units are being duped by lying Japanese propaganda and by attempts to set the nationalities against each other. They are taking a hostile attitude towards the Korean people, towards communists in particular, saying that they are the puppets of Japanese imperialism and that they are going to communize Manchuria. Unless we make them see how wrong they are and lead them in the right direction, it will be very difficult to unite the anti-Japanese forces, and it will be impossible to concentrate our efforts on the struggle against Japanese imperialism. Therefore, in order to expose the Japanese imperialists' lying propaganda against U.S. Korean communists and their stratagem of pitting the nationalities against each other, and to cement the militant unity of the Korean and Chinese peoples, we must do our utmost to form the Allied front with the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units. To do so, we must first of all make bold approaches to the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units and strengthen the work among the soldiers. Though these units of a nationalist army are not steadfast because of the vacillation and class limitations of the upper ranks, they constitute big anti-Japanese forces. We must help them to overcome their vacillation and dual character through struggle, while actively encouraging their anti-Japanese element. At the same time, we must bring the rank and file, the basic masses in the anti-Japanese units, to national and class awareness, and thus actively lead them in the anti-Japanese struggle. In forming the Allied Front with the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units, our basic principle must be to form a united front with the rank and file and, firmly relying on this, a united front at the top. The top ranks of the anti-Japanese units are made up of warlords of landlord and capitalist origin, and so they constantly waver in the anti-Japanese struggle, whereas the absolute majority of the rank and file are from the worker and peasant masses, and they can play an active part in that struggle. Therefore, we must first direct our serious attention to going boldly among the masses of anti-Japanese soldiers and to forming the Allied front with them. Only when we base ourselves on a united front with the rank and file, in forming a united front with the top ranks, will it be possible to help them to overcome their vacillation and irresolution, and soundly push forward the movement for an anti-Japanese Allied front as a whole. However, we should not neglect contacts at the top. An army is a group with a strong esprit de corps, commanded by superiors. So, if we boldly contact the high-ranking officers of the anti-Japanese units and win them over first, this will be a great help in forming an anti-Japanese allied front. As an organizational step for winning over the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units, we must organize special detachments in Wanqing and Antu, where they are concentrated. These detachments must strive to win over the anti-Japanese units so as to expand our armed forces and, at the same time, must step up organizational and political activity so that the units can take an active part in the anti-Japanese struggle. As we have said before, we must strive to form an allied front with the Chinese nationalist anti-Japanese units and, at the same time, organize the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army unit in each county. If we do this, we shall be able to forge ahead with the armed struggle against Japanese imperialism, the common enemy of the Korean and Chinese. 5. On strengthening the work of the party organizations and the Young Communist League. Comrades, for the successful implementation of our important tasks, it is imperative for us to establish basic party organizations in all areas and strengthen the work of YCL organizations. We achieved no small success in improving and strengthening the leadership of the YCL and of other mass organizations in accordance with the decisions of the Mingyuegou meeting held last May. On the basis of this success, we must continue to pay careful attention to forming party organizations and strengthening the work of the YCL. Only when the vanguard role of party organizations is enhanced and the work of the YCL further strengthened, can we successfully carry out all the tasks that will arise in organizing and waging armed struggle and make sound organizational and ideological preparations for the founding of a unified Marxist-Leninist party. To establish the cadre of the guerrilla army and the organizational backbone of the future Korean Communist Party, we must strengthen the life in party organizations. The organizational backbone of the revolution can only be formed through hard organizational training and practical struggle. Therefore, we must accept into the party, at the grassroots, those fine workers and peasants and progressive intellectuals who have been tempered in mass political struggle, and give them even harder party training. In this way, we shall bring them up to be communist cadres who have a revolutionary world outlook, know no vacillation in adversity, and can be equal to any revolutionary task. At present, a very important task is to strengthen the work of the YCL together with that of party organizations. Since party organizations are still weak, it is imperative to do good YCL work and keep on expanding its ranks. Only then can we ensure that we have a group of fine new young communists who are not poisoned by factionalism and the filth of various kinds of opportunism, and establish the organizational backbone for party building more soundly. Not only that, but only when we reinforce these ranks can we found the anti-Japanese People's Guerrilla Army with fine young communists at the core and energetically organize, and launch a mass movement to support and help the guerrilla army. To enlarge the YCL ranks, we need a good knowledge of the characteristics of young workers and peasants and all other sections of the youth, and we must adapt our organizational and political work to suit them. Some YCL cadres, who have little knowledge of the specific features of youth from various walks of life, do poor work with the young workers and peasants and other youth of working class origin, saying that these young people cannot play a vanguard role because of their poor education and that they cannot keep secrets. They also keep them at arm's length instead of educating them and fail to enlist them into the YCL ranks. As a result, staunch young workers and peasants who are imbued with strong class hatred and a lofty fighting spirit stand outside the ranks for one reason or another. If we are careless about influencing the worker and peasant youth and do not actively draw them into the YCL ranks, we will be unable to create young communists of worker and peasant class origin. The YCL must attach the highest importance to working among young workers and peasants. Being young proletarians, young workers have a stronger revolutionary spirit, esprit de corps, and sense of unity than their counterparts in any other class. Moreover, owing to their wretched plight, the absence of political rights, and unbearable hunger and poverty, they have a vital interest in the revolution, and naturally take the lead in the revolutionary struggle to overthrow the old society. For this reason, even if they lack knowledge, they can all be brought up as staunch young communists when they are educated in a revolutionary way and recruited into the YCL ranks. Peasant youth, who account for the majority of our youth, are suffering from the most outrageous oppression and harsh feudal exploitation under the torture of the Japanese imperialists and landlords. Therefore, even though they are still backward politically and do not have enough organizational training when they're class, consciousness is awakened, and they are drawn into the YCL and other revolutionary organizations where they will receive a good political education. They will go hand in hand with the working class youth and creditably discharge their duties as the main force of the revolution. Also of importance in YCL work is to rally progressive students into the YCL organizations by working effectively among them. For they not only have a strong sense of justice and are receptive to progressive ideas and the trend of the time, they also have a very strong feeling for the social reform and anti-feudalism, which will strike off the shackles of the old society and be needed to build a new one. In particular, since students are subjected to the Japanese imperialists' suppression of and discrimination against the Korean nation, their anti-Japanese sentiments are strong and their national awareness high. So, if they are given a good education and organizational training, they will successfully play the role of pioneer by disseminating progressive socialist ideas and educating and awakening the majority of workers and peasants, thus guiding them into the revolutionary movement. In reinforcing the YCL ranks, it is important to cultivate leading cadres from among the most progressive of the young workers and peasants in each locality, with the enemy intensifying their suppression. It is only these leaders in different areas that can educate the majority of young people well, expand and develop the YCL organizations to suit the demands of the advancing revolution and lead them to play their vanguard role creditably. The YCL members must be pioneers in educating the masses and organizing and mobilizing them. Revolutionary work always begins with mass political work, which is a revolutionary's basic duty. The YCL cadres must acquire the revolutionary method of work, that is putting confidence in the strength of the masses and relying thoroughly on them and activating them in carrying on the revolutionary struggle. Comrades, whether or not we can realize the historic cause of our country's restoration by organizing and waging armed struggle and wiping out Japanese imperialism depends entirely upon how we discharge our assigned revolutionary tasks. We are revolutionaries who are determined to devote our very lives to our country's restoration and to the victory of the cause of socialism and communism. Whatever the ordeals and difficulties that stand in our way, we will fulfill our duty as communists, as revolutionaries, by accomplishing our revolutionary tasks. Let us all pool our strength and go forward in armed struggle to destroy Japanese imperialism. Victory will surely be ours, and our country will be liberated without fail.